All right, well, let's start with Bengals training camp. That's the biggest thing going on in the city right now. We'll go through some storylines from the second week of camp. We'll start with Wednesday's practice, which was making headlines because there were all types of fights going on, Skinny. There were 4 fights at practice on Wednesday. That was the big takeaway from all the media types afterwards. What were your thoughts after a day of fighting at training camp?
So here's what happened. There's really no, they've had one that we know of live tackling period. There seemed to be one on Tuesday as well that only the defense seemed to know about, and that might have sparked what took place on Wednesday, or actually on Monday rather, because they were knocking them around a little bit. So what happens, I think, is honestly with no live tackling, what you get running backs or wide receivers who make a move, right? And what the defense does is they tag off on a guy to basically say, I was there to make the tackle. And then there's an assistant coach or two that blows the whistle to blow the play dead. And then there's yapping that goes on. And so the yapping, I think, got to an extreme point yesterday. Then the defense got a little physical. It actually started with the offense. Ted Karras admittedly finished off a block a little too long on Logan Wilson. They both went tumbling to the ground. Logan came up and swung at him. And that kind of got the ball rolling, because from there it felt like every other play here came something different. And then probably the end all of it was Andre Yoshavash getting whacked pretty good as he was going in the end zone by Jermaine Pratt, and that led to Ted Karras kind of marching down there and starting some more. From what I understand, Zach Taylor told the players that he liked teammates taking up for each other, but let's be smart and careful. And I think you're at that point where literally it's time to go tackle somebody for real.
And that's part of it too, right? It's not just the fact that there's yapping going on and there's the question over, were you down or did you just break that off for a big long gainer? It's also the matter of guys are just, they're football players. They want to be hitting each other, yes. And you keep blowing the play dead before they can actually do so. At some point, they just go a little bit too far and they get a little bit too physical. I mean, this is silliness. It's nonsensical. It's honestly kind of a big nothing burger. But when you're in the middle of training camp, there's not a lot to talk about. This is going to get some headlines.
Yeah, 1 or 2 probably isn't, but when you're up to 4, at some point as a coach, you're going, now you're wasting my time. You're wasting time by us having to continually separate you. So we've had enough of this part of it. So yeah, I mean, as far as the, if somebody getting hurt or whatever, no. But I do go back to, I do think that does, there used to be live tackling in practices and they've kind of done away with that. And I get that to some degree, but these guys are so testosterone-filled, competitive people that, so I shoulder bump you to the ground instead of tackling you to the ground. And then I'm going to tell you all about it. And you're going to tell me, oh, you didn't tag me there. I just broke that. I would have gone for 70 yards. And they're constantly yapping at each other. And again, sometimes it just spills over to what we got yesterday.
Can I just point out that football players who fight are the fakest tough guys in all of sports?
Because you're stupid if you take us. DK Metcalf of the Seahawks probably did the smartest thing. If you're going to do something, take your helmet off and swing it at somebody. I mean, use it as a weapon. But you taking a swing at a guy in a fully padded situation and his helmet's still on, that ain't too swift.
That's what I'm saying. You are legally allowed to take guys out and hit them within your sport. First of all, you waiting until after the play is dead to start fighting and being physical afterwards is just like a complete sign of you're not the toughest guy on the field. You are the weaker individual out there. And second of all, like you said, I mean, what didn't one of the coaches say? They've got $1,000 worth of stuff on protecting them. What a week! Right. Like, who cares if you're throwing punches at each other? It's ridiculous. In football, the enforcers, the scariest guys, are not the guys who fight. It's not like basketball where you have the goons at the end of the bench. It's not like hockey where you have the enforcer on your goon on your bench that comes in and starts fighting and you fear him. Even in baseball, there are those guys that are known for having a short fuse and like you throw inside him, he might come after you, or even the pitcher who's known for that a little bit. There are those guys that are feared a little bit. In football, the guys who fight aren't feared. It's not the guys who throw punches after plays that are feared. It's the big hitters that do it legally within the whistles.
Yeah, correct. And again, that goes back to when you're not allowed to tackle in practice. I just think that builds itself up. It really does.
Yeah. All right, Skinny, one of the other big storylines this week was the loss of Cam Sample. He's going to be out for the year with an Achilles injury, according to Zach Taylor. The Bengals went on. They signed defensive end Andre Carter, a rookie out of Indiana, and defensive tackle Joshua Pryor, a second-year player out of Bowie State University, who played in 7 games last year for Washington. So what's the immediate thoughts here with the Cam Sample aftermath? Obviously, he's not a starter, but he is a piece that was going to get some reps this year.
Yeah, but I think he slid down the depth chart a little bit by the drafting of McKinley Jackson, who now is hurt. We don't know to what extent that really is at this point. We'll find out actually after we tape this podcast. I'll be heading down to Bengals and Zach Taylor talks today. I had him on my roster. But if you were to put a depth chart together, a real depth chart, not the one that they just did, which again they're doing things politically correct. He probably is the ninth defensive lineman, and he's he's filled a nice role for this team. He's done exactly what they ask. He's a great teammate, all the things you want out of a guy who's that part of your roster. But I don't. Anybody making this a huge loss is not selling it correctly. I feel sorry. I feel sorry for him because this is the final year of his rookie contract, which means he heads into a free agent offseason coming off of an injury. That's never fun or easy. You could see him maybe even be re-signed here as a depth piece, because they know him and he knows them. That's the thing that's disappointing. But what do you lose from a performance standpoint? A deep bench role player, and if that's the least of your issues, then you're doing okay.
If is Pryor and Carter, the two guys they just added, are they just being added as extra bodies for reps in camp and to get them through the training camp or the preseason games?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, you've got Devonta Maxwell, who's a defensive tackle, hasn't practiced. Now, McKinley Jackson's hurt. Cam Sample's hurt. You're not going to play your starters a ton. So Sheldon Rankins and B.J. Hill won't play a lot. So that's Chris Jenkins and then Travis Bell and the kid they just signed. At the ends, Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard aren't going to play in the preseason opener. And then that means Miles Murphy and Joseph Osai will start. And then, how many snaps do they play? And then after that, you got the Jeff Gunters of the world, the Cedric Johnsons, who was a 7th-round pick, and then this kid they just signed. So, yeah, this is literally so I was down talking to Frank Pollock yesterday, and I saw these three getting ready to warm up, and I went, yep, I hope you guys make it because at least you're going to get some preseason games under your belt because, that's literally what this is to get you through some preseason games.
Skinny, you are typically the voice of reason here when it comes to the Bengals coverage. A lot of the other media types, they like to get really excited about things when they happen, and they really like to hype guys up and talk about them, and then we'll come back, listen to you, and sometimes you have a bit different take. So here's what I'm most interested to get your take on Andrei Iosivas, because everything I listen to, everything I read, Andrei Iosivas looks like Jerry Rice in his prime here through the first 2 weeks of training camp, and he's going to be a major impact player for the Bengals this season. Now, obviously, that's overstating it a bit, but it does seem like everyone covering the team feels very strongly about him being the leader as the third receiver right now, and the opportunity that he'll have to make a big impact for this team. Is that a bit too much for training camp reps, or is he really turning some heads here?
I think he's doing a nice job. Yeah, I think he probably is the leader of the pack. If you're to put a third wide receiver out there at the moment, the fact that he's learning to play in the slot has been helpful. He really didn't do that last year, and that's a tough position to learn. They've kind of taken Jermaine Burton out of that option at the moment and just stuck him back outside and said, listen, son, just go outside, learn outside this year, and then we'll figure it out after this. And that's not a knock on Jermaine. It's just the slot is such a nuanced position. Charlie Jones struggled with that last year, and then the injury set him back in that regard. And, that's what, you kind of take Tyler Boyd for granted, but Tyler was just so good at understanding all the nuances of what to do out of the slot. Sometimes you got to be a part of pass blocking protections, not a ton, but occasionally, you have to be a part of that, maybe chipping in here before you go out on your route, and you got to understand some of those things. So I think that's the thing for Andre. The step he's taken is he's now able to be a versatile piece for them. And he's taken advantage of the reps he's been given too, and performed pretty well. I mean, I don't say he pops every practice. He just doesn't, but he's had moments where he's popped. I think all the receivers kind of have had those moments, even down to the Cedric Jacksons of the world have had moments like that. So yeah, I honestly, if I were to put a fantasy draft board together, I'm not sure he'd be on my draft board at the moment, depending on how deep you go in a league. But I'll be honest with you, the last few years, Tyler Boyd probably wasn't on that draft board either.
Yeah. Do you feel like he's clearly the third receiver right now?
I don't know, man. I think Charlie Jones has made up some ground. And I thought Charlie, when they drafted him, the initial concept was they always seem to try to draft a year early for replacements. It doesn't always work out. It didn't work out with Cedric Ogbuehi. It didn't work out with Dax Hill, moving in for Jesse Bates. But they were trying to make a preemptive strike with a slot receiver, and Charlie kind of fit that mold. So I think Charlie still has a legit chance. And honestly, I mean, to this point, we still don't know what Jamar Chase is going to do. So maybe it's both of them on the field when all is said and done.
There are receivers every year who are like Iosivas, who are the long shot guy taken late in the draft or unsigned free agent, or they have a cool backstory. And in training camp, receivers are sort of the fun storyline because someone's got to make the catches. Someone's got to be out there getting reps and scoring touchdowns on the field. And it's one of the easier things for fans to see happen in a training camp setting. It's hard to really judge what the backup defensive tackle is doing or what the extra safety, the young safety is doing. But you can see the wide receiver contorting his body, making a great catch. So every year there are these long shot guys that fans get excited about, that they're fighting for. They become sort of a fan favorite. They're like, hopefully that guy makes the team. And oftentimes you're just doing well if that guy can make it on the practice squad. But Yoshivas feels like he's got some real upside here. Is like he hung around last year. He's back this year and people are really talking him up. And he definitely has the full blown, like the Ivy League story, the track star story, the hair, the look to him. He's got it all in terms of the fan favorite storyline. So that would be a fun one if he's able to make it work.
Yeah, and honestly, I the year that the Bengals drafted him, and they're always snap grades, right, the day of the draft, and you just go down and grade them, and it is what it is. It's people do it, I do it too, and I gave that selection an A+ just because in the 6th round to take a guy with that kind of athleticism when you don't really need him at the time, but it's a future development guy, I thought was extraordinarily smart, and I think it's coming to fruition. I think at the very least he's a rotational piece. And I go back to this. I'll defer to Joe Burrow. When Joe Burrow talks about you openly, in a press conference setting, he's done that a few times about Andre. That's usually my litmus test of is a guy doing the things that are going to make him be on the field. And when Joe talks about you, that usually speaks volumes, in my opinion.
And that's a good point. I should have probably led with that. That's what kind of took it from. I kept hearing it, reading it from other people's coverage. And then when Joe Burrow kind of made the comments he made end of last week, into the weekend, I believe it was, about Andre, it was like, okay, well, that's a little bit different when he says, like, Andre's going to have a really good year for us. I did take note of that. That was a little bit different to hear that. Finally, Jamar Chase, he is still sitting out, has not practiced yet. Skinny, are there any updates there? Do you sense that this is getting any more hostile or things are changing?
No, the only thing that's changing is he seems to change his hat every day. It's a different hat. So, I mean, that feels like that changes daily. No, I'm going to stick to my guns on this, and I'm probably going to be dead wrong. And for Bengals fans, I hope I am. Again, I could see this spilling over into the regular season, because if not, again, what did you do this for? And I've had people on the beat that say, well, he doesn't want to risk injury in camp. Okay. But so he's going to go risk injury in games playing on this $1.2 million contract for this year? That makes no sense to me either. If you're not going to risk it now, are you really going to risk it in games too? With still another year to go before you get to this extension? Are you really going to do that? Or are you just going to say, you know what, I can forego 1.2 mil because I'm going to make money down the line off of that? I
get why he would risk it. Why he wouldn't want to risk it in practice. And it feels different to do it in games versus doing it in training camp and in practice. Plus, let's just face it, Skinny. Training camp isn't fun.
No.
Like there might just be the fact of like, he just doesn't want to be out there doing this stuff that he feels is meaningless. So I do think there is the possibility that is happening. Now, that being said, in terms of what his leverage is, you're absolutely right. Him missing training camp and missing preseason games does nothing to make the Bengals budge. It only really affects them if he's going to actually sit out games. So in terms of building leverage to negotiate for his contract, you're right. This is doing absolutely nothing, in my opinion, other than creating a little bit of a distraction, a little bit of a storyline during training camp when everyone's looking for something to write about. Aside from that, I don't think the Bengals care at all if he sits out until the start of games. Now, if he wants to sit out games, that does change things.
Sure. No, I'll stick to my original prediction on this. And people laughed at me on the beat when I said this. They're like, oh, and I think I'm going to be closer to right than I was to wrong. I said August 28th. It's the day after cut down day. That's kind of the first practice as you start to get ready for the opener against New England. And that gives you the rest of that week into the next week, about 6 practices or so to get yourself ready to play. That feels about right, in my opinion. I don't know what statement that would have made for him other than he didn't take part in camp and didn't risk the injury thing. And you're really not risking that in practice preparing for games. And, I'm going to stick to that August 28th is when we see Jamar Chase as they get ready in earnest for that opener against New England.
And again, you said he's still there every day in a hat, wearing different hats, and he's going through meetings and everything. So it's not like he's detached from the situation. Correct. It is literally he's just not doing the physical activity of practicing.
Correct.
All right. So we've got an Ask Skinny Anything question that's very specific to the Bengals in training camp. So we're going to do it now. Please rank these Bengals from most likely to be cut to least likely to be cut. Here's the list: Jackson Carman, Chris Evans, Brad Robbins, Zach Carter, Shedrick Jackson, Deontay Smith, Tanner McLaughlin.
All right, I'll start with Tanner McLaughlin. Is the most likely. They're not going to keep 5 tight ends, and you'll be able to stash him on the practice squad. I'll go Deontay Smith. He's been hurt, kind of out of sight, out of mind. I thought I didn't have him on my original 53-man roster, and when you're not doing anything, and I like Deontay personally. I mean, again, it's just a football decision, and it's a shame because he hasn't been able to compete. He'd be next on my list of most likely. Chris Evans would be up there. I don't think they keep 4 running backs. I think they'd be more willing to keep 7 wide receivers than 4 running backs. I mean, you're going to play 2, and then Travion Williams is a good third, and you can stash Chris Evans on the practice squad and probably either go pick somebody up, or they've got 2 other undrafted free agents in camp and, keep one of those 2 guys on that spot. But you're not going to have 4 up for game day, in my opinion. Chris may have an outside shot to make it if he shows in kickoff returns, and I don't think he's going to be one of the first 2. I think it's going to be Chase Brown and Travion Williams. But if Chris does something in the preseason, maybe on kickoff returns, maybe he sneaks his way in there as a 4th guy. I'll go Shedrick Jackson next. Again, the 6 wide receivers seem etched in stone to me, and I'm including Jamar Chase as one of the 6. And it's Jamar, and you can disagree with this, but I'll give you the 6 that I have etched in stone, and then we'll go from there. The 6 are Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Charlie Jones, Andre Yoshavash, Trenton Irwin, and Jermaine Burton. Those are the 6. I don't see any of them not making this team. If you kept the 7th, it would probably be Shed, but they also signed Hakeem Butler for a decent chunk. They don't have to pay him if he doesn't make it, but he's a big-bodied guy. He catches everything. He's strong. I mean, this is a guy who was a former 4th-round pick of the Cardinals who actually came out of the draft with a 2nd-round grade. He was player of the year in the UFL. Talked to Troy Walters about him for about 10 minutes a couple days ago, and Troy – I was just kind of waiting for the soft shoe of, Hakeem needs to do this. He said, man, he's already in the playbook. He knows it. I said, I'm not a wide receivers coach, Troy, but he sure looks like he's a little bit slow out of his break. And he said, yeah, a lot of big body guys are, but he goes, I look at 3 things. Can you get off press coverage? He can, because he's strong. What do you like at the top of your routes? He goes, he does struggle a little bit with that, and we're going to keep working on that. And 3, can you make contested catches? And he absolutely makes them. So he checks 2 of 3 major boxes for Troy Walters. And again, I think they like him a lot and would like to find a way to keep him or stash him on the practice squad. There were 2 others. I think Zach Carter now is, I had him as my 10th defensive lineman. I think the Cam Sample injury, and he was running with the ones a little bit in place of Sheldon Rankins yesterday in practice. I think Zach Carter is probably the most likely to make it in that group, and probably the 2nd most likely, and it's honestly by default, would be Jackson Carman. He hasn't been very impressive. He doesn't look very interested. But right now, I mean, the loser of the Amarius Mims Trent Brown race, and Mims seems to be taking steps forward to win that race. That guy's going to be the backup swing tackle on game days, but I think you'll keep a 2nd tackle on the 53. And out of the rest, it's either Deontay Smith, who again hasn't practiced a whole lot, and I think Jackson's ahead of him anyway, and Devin Cochran, who's just gotten destroyed by undrafted free agents and 7th-round picks. So I think it's Jackson by default. I mean, you could maybe say, well, Cody Ford could play swing, or could play tackle and guard, and maybe that knocks Jackson off the roster. I just think I think they still feel there's some untapped potential there that they'd like to see one final time to kick the tire. It wouldn't shock me if he gets cut, but in that list you just gave me, I think Zach Carter now has kind of locked himself in. So I'm going to say he's the most likely to make it. The 2nd most likely to make it out of that group would be Jackson Carman. Did I miss somebody?
Brad Robbins was the only one you didn't mention.
I'm going to have to play the 50-50 on that, because I nobody knows until we see what the BYU kid Ray Cow can do in games. He's shown just incredible leg strength at times in camps. He had one the other day that was 75 yards. That was I think 5.6 hang time I had him on. I don't time all these punts, but I timed him on that one. I'm like, holy Toledo. But I've seen him hit him off the side of his foot for 32 yards. And so let's see what he does in a game when a team can rush him and, the pressure of punt. And that's the thing. I think that got to Brad Robbins a little bit last year. I mean, there's something to the pressure of punting in games. It is how you got to see how a guy does. So I'm going to take the 5th on that one, just because I have to see what Rakow does in games. I think if Rakow shows that he can be consistent, I think he's got a bigger leg. And if that's the case, I could see them keeping him. I do think if you're Darren Simmons, you'd probably like the bird in the hand and maybe stash this kid on the practice squad, and then let's see where it goes. And if 3 weeks into the season, Brandon Robbins is scuffling and this kid's killing it in practice, then maybe you go to the kid. I think you always defer to the guy you've at least seen do it in games before, and Brad's done it at a capable level in games, not a great level, but a capable level.
Well, they will get the opportunity to punt in a game for the first time, at least a preseason game, this Saturday night at Paycor Stadium when the Bengals take on the Buccaneers at 7 p.m. Skinny, how many of the starters will we see and for how long in the first preseason game?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we'll get a more clear answer on that today from Zach Taylor. But if I were to guess, I would say everybody but Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, and if you consider Trent Brown a starter, Trent Brown. And then Chris Rankle and I tried to attack this question on our training camp podcast yesterday. I said probably 7 to 10 plays for each. If the offense goes 3 and out, I think you'd see them for a second series. If they moved the ball and got a couple of first downs and ran 7 to 10 plays and didn't score, I don't think you'd see them again, just enough to get their feet wet. And I think the same for the defense. If they got a 3 and out, I think you'd see them back out there one more series. If a team, drove it on them and got a couple of first downs and they forced a punt or scored or whatever, I don't think you'd see them again. Maybe you would if they scored quickly, to say, hey, that wasn't very good. Let's go do it right on this next series. But yeah, I don't think it'll be a lot, but I do think it'll be it'll be some.
Skinny, who are you most interested to see, given it's this early, play in a preseason game?
Joe Burrow. I want to see how he reacts when he gets hit and has to go down. How does he brace his fall? How does that fall affect him? I will tell you, Rick, I think the last handful of practices, he has looked really, really sharp. I thought yesterday he was really good. I mean, made some throws on the run across his body. It looked like, okay, that's Joe Burrow. That's the guy that I've seen before. I mean, the throw he made to Shedrick Jackson on Friday on the run, kind of scrambling out to his right and just flicked it down the field to Shedrick Jackson, who was behind the defense about 65 yards, was a thing of beauty. And the ball looks like it's spinning better out of his hands, all those things, but he's not gotten hit yet, right? And he knows that. He knows he needs to get hit. He needs to feel how it's going to feel when he braces his fall and, has people around him. And that can become a worry too. Like, the mental part of, I don't want to get hit with this wrist. I mean, is it there? Because it's not there now because you don't fear it in a practice. It may happen by accident, but you don't fear it. You can fear that in a game. And so I'm really interested in how Joe Burrow reacts to that.
Who's getting the extra reps on the defensive line from that situation that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, probably Zach Carter. Sheldon Rankins isn't hurt, but he's a vet, so they may have given him a little bit of time off. And then the ends, Miles Murphy and Joseph Osai. And I think they both have had their moments. Unfortunately for Murphy, he's gone up against Mims, and Mims has just owned him. And I think, honestly, I know people are going to look and go, oh, that's probably an indictment on Miles Murphy. I don't see it as that. I see it as, and I talked to Frank Pollock about this yesterday, I said, I've never seen a guy the size of Miles Murphy get enveloped like he did by Mims. And he said, yeah, I saw that a couple times too. And it's just freakish how big that kid is. And then he still is able to lock you up and move his feet. And usually, when you talk to coaches about rookies this time of year, Rick, and it's probably when you're talking to a basketball coach about a freshman, you're usually getting that, well, yeah, he's got a long way to go. It's early. Frank Pollock gushes about this guy. I mean, wow. And I think that tells you where he is with Amarius Mims and where Mims is in his progress.
Because the punter battle seems so wide open right now, is it going to be a situation where, we're just charting each of these guys' punt? Like, this guy had a good one, put a check mark in his name. This guy had a bad one, put an X next to his name. Each punt, they're just trading off and kind of battling it out here.
Hey, I'll tell you what, Darren Simmons charts everything. He charts every practice punt. He charts it all. A few years ago, remember when Randy Bullock beat out Jake Elliott and Bengals fans were going crazy, and Jake's gone on to a nice career with Philadelphia, but Darren's point, and having watched those practices and charting a chunk of it myself, Randy Bullock outkicked him. I mean, if you're going to have a competition, you just don't go, well, it's okay. I still think this other guy's got great potential, but yeah, the other guy, again, if you're going to have a straight competition, then let's do it. And I think Darren Simmons is really good at that.
They forgot to check calf toughness for Randy Bullock. His calf just couldn't hold up, man.
Not in that opener. That cost him.
Is there anyone else? Is there another position group to watch or
the wide receivers
specifically?
Yeah, the wide receivers, I think for sure. Again, that whole group from Yoshavash to Charlie Jones to Burton to Akeem Butler to Shedrick Jackson. Again, they're all going to play with different quarterbacks, right? So maybe that's not fair to completely gauge it. They're all going to play against different competition levels. I don't know what Tampa's doing as far as playing their starters either. But, some of those guys, it'll be backups versus backups. But, let's see what they've got. And then the cornerback situation. Dax Hill has been up and down. I think DJ Turner's had a pretty good camp, and I think the rookie Josh Newton's had a great camp at corner, the rookie corner. I like to see what those guys can do as well. And so, some of those battles I think are very important. And the Osai Murphy thing, let's see what Murphy can do when he's not going against Amarius Mims. Maybe it really is Mims is just that damn good, and Murphy's having a hard time against a guy who's a future All-Pro for all I know. That's a big step forward. I know saying that it is, but I mean, maybe he is. And that's just the poor Miles Murphy going up against that kid every day in camp. But Joseph Osai, I mean, he beat Orlando Brown a couple times the other day, once for a safety, and has looked pretty good in camp so far.
I'll wrap up our Bengals segment by doing our obligatory. We talked about the punters. I haven't referenced him in a few weeks. Drew Chrisman. I did want to mention, I think he has finally turned the
TikTok
page
star
on the NFL punting career. I noticed his social media posts now have gone from sneaking on the high school fields to punt to now he has started a moving business. He has bought a moving franchise. So Drew Chrisman, shout out to him. I don't think he will be back punting for the Bengals anymore.
I do find it odd that listen, he had the terrible punt in Kansas City, right? It
right.
cost him his job. I'm still shocked that another team hadn't given him an opportunity. I mean, it's not like if you look at his numbers the year he punted with the Bengals, he averaged 37 yards a punt, for goodness sakes. He's got a big leg. But I do wonder if the weirdness of TikTok has made teams go, yeah, no, I don't need that cat around.
Well, I don't think it's that, but it is weird how, like, once you're out with some of this stuff, if you're a fringe guy, sometimes you just never get the chance to get back in. Like, I don't think Drew Chrisman is much different from the bottom third of the punters in the NFL.
Absolutely agree.
And like, even since he left, I feel like the Bengals punting situation has been more unstable than the when he was here. Quite honestly, it's been more of a concern the last few seasons. So I don't know. It's just it is a weird thing. I feel bad for the guy, but his social media posts have kept me entertained for certain.
Actually, I had not seen them, but we were talking about him actually in camp the other day, and a couple people referenced the moving company in his new business. I'm like, all right, well, he's turned the page, and good for him.
Yeah. All right. Let's put a bow on the Bengals segment here.
Sure, you could stop watching now, but let's be honest, you want to see more. So click some of those links, or better yet, go ahead and tap subscribe. That way you'll catch more content from Local 12.